Hi everybody, it's Stuart Hillard back again with another tutorial on my channel Stuart Hillard Makes. If you're not already a subscriber, what are you waiting for? Please subscribe, tap the bell so that you always get notifications when we've got a new video posted. And do please like and comment on the videos as well and show me pictures of what you're making. I love to see what you're doing. Today's tutorial is, well, a little bit romantic. I'm a little bit of a romantic soul at heart, and I thought for Valentine there's nothing nicer than sitting down with someone you love, mum, dad, best friend, your kids, your partner, or just a really special friend, to enjoy a meal. And so I've done some placemats and napkins, and but I mean, you could do these for any time of year. Now this fabric just, you know, sometimes you just find a fabric and it is perfect. This is a Riley Blake fabric. It's a couple of years old now, but I just thought it was perfect for this job. But a big floral would look really good. Something like K facet fabric would look fab, you know, with a contrast. Dig into your stash. It's fat quarter friendly. So if you've got some fat quarters, you know, tucked away somewhere that you've been waiting for that special project, now's the time. You're going to need 1 fat quarter of fabric for the main part of your placemat, and then you're going to need probably about half a fat quarter for the cross and also for the edging. And then you're going to need a piece of fabric for the backing, and that can just be a plain fabric. I've just got this little stripe, and then I've also made a little simple matching napkin, and again I've just cut that from another fat quarter. So I had a little pack of coordinating fat quarters. So we're going to start off by making the placemat. So I've got another colorway of the same fabric. This one is in blacks and greys and really smart sort of gold tan color. As I say, this fabric really lent itself very well for this project and kind of dictated the dimensions a little bit. I mean, you want a placemat to be a certain size. You want it to be about, you know, 13 or 14 inches high, round about 18 inches, 19 inches long. That's a nice generous sized placemat. So if you find another fabric that isn't the same dimensions as mine or doesn't cut quite the same, I mean, feel free to just use this as an inspiration and make your own placemats based on it. I would love that. With this fabric, I've cut out a rectangle, and this is 18 inches long and it is 12 inches deep. Okay, so as I said, I got it from a fat quarter. And I've really used the pattern so that the pattern's nice and square and straight on it. So I used that more to guide me when I was cutting. Now I've also got a contrast fabric, and this was from the same set of fat quarters. This is like a little sort of tone on tone. And I've cut 6 strips from that, and they're all 1.5 inches wide. And I just cut them along the long edge of the fat quarter. So they're all plenty long enough. I mean, they're longer than I need them really, but that's okay. So I've got those to one hand. Now, the first thing that I'm going to need to do is make 1 cut on my fabric. And you're going to cut 3 inches in from this edge. Now that just so happens to cut straight down the middle between the hearts. Wasn't I lucky? If you need to cut a little bit more or a little bit less to get your motif nicely centered, do that. If you're using just a big kind of blousy floral, doesn't matter where you make the cut, but about 3 inches in is great. Okay, so I've got my first cut, that 3-inch strip of fabric that I've cut off the left-hand side of my main panel. And then I've got a 1.5-inch strip of contrast fabric. And what I'm going to do is on the inside edge, I'm going to sew this strip of fabric. Now I've cut my strip of fabric, it's about 2 inches longer than I need it to be. So I'm going to leave a little bit of overhang at either end and just lay the fabrics right sides together. I've got my machine set ready for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to sew the strip on, and then I'm going to trim the edges top and bottom even. So no real need to pin at this stage. So I'm going to set my seam, and then I'm going to press all my seam allowances towards that contrast strip. So first thing, I'm going to push my fabric back, kind of crease it with my thumbnail. Here we go, and then I'll press it. These placemats would work really well with any kind of novelty fabric. They would also work really well for Christmas or for a special birthday, or just any time of year when you want to kind of refresh your dining table or kitchen table. So there we go. I've got that strip added on. And what I'm going to do next is just use my rotary cutter and ruler, and I'm going to line up the edge of my ruler with this piece of fabric here and also with this line here, and then I'm going to trim straight across the top. And that will ensure that everything is staying nice and square and nice and true. Okay, so my edges now are trimmed even. I can sew the whole thing back onto the panel that I cut it from originally. So I'm kind of joining it all back up again with that strip inserted in the middle. Now here, there won't be any trimming top and bottom. So this time I need to pin it. So match your ends first of all. So when you're pinning anything, there are the important bits that you should always start by pinning. And they are the start and the finish, very possibly the middle, any block intersections where if you're doing patchwork, where you've joined pieces of fabric together, make sure those seams match up and pin there. So all the bits that matter, all the bits that your eye is going to be drawn to, that's where you should pin, and then pin in between those pins. And if there's any fullness or any extra anywhere, same with dressmaking, you know, you pin the start and the finish and any notches first, and then you pin in between, and you'll always get a good finish. Okay, so that's pinned and ready to sew. So same again, 1/4 inch seam allowance. I've had this fabric for a few years, and it's been sitting on my shelf, and I keep looking at it. I kept looking at it and thinking, one day, my pretty. And then, you know, I didn't want to cut it until I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So don't ever beat yourself up for storing fabric for years and years, because one day the right project will come along. Okay, so that's all sewn. I can set it, crease it, and then give it a final press. And just make sure all the seam allowances are going towards that contrast strip. Actually, if you did no more than that, then layered that up and finished it off, that would be a lovely placemat. So there we go, placemat number 1, bingo. But I'm going to do another cut. Okay, so the next cut that I'm going to make, here's my bottom edge, and I'm going to cut 3 inches in from that edge straight across. So through the original panel and through the strip that I've added, okay, to create that cross. Okay, so real nice, simple, easy patchwork. Okay, so I've made that second cut, again, 3 inches in from the edge. So now I'm going to add my contrast strip to this side, press it, and then trim the ends square, and then sew it to the original panel exactly the same way. We're just putting the stripe the other way. I've sewn the bottom strip on now as well. Everything's all trimmed up. And now I'm ready to add my border. Or not. I mean, here's placemat number 2. You could layer this and quilt this. And there's another lovely placemat. Doesn't need a border necessarily, but I'm going to put one on. So that's what the remaining 4 strips that I cut from my fat quarter are for. So I've got 4 1.5 inch strips, and they're just cut the long edge, about 20 inches long at this stage. They're longer than I need. That's all that matters. So what I'm going to do is add strips down the sides, and then I will trim the edges even using my ruler to make sure everything stays square, and then I will add the strips top and bottom, and then that is the placemat top finished. So join me back when I've done that. We've got our borders sewn on, so that's placemat number 3. Now, this placemat doesn't have a binding on it, okay? It's one of the things that makes it quicker and easier. I'm going to show you a really neat way of achieving that. And I'm just going to grab my original placemat and just show you something. Can you see that there's a seam all the way in the backing from one side to the other? This placemat uses a technique called bagging out in order to put it together. So normally when we make a quilt sandwich, we're going to put the pretty side of the outside of the quilt facing out and the pretty side of the lining facing out on the other side of the batting, quilt it all together, and then we've got a raw edge to bind. What we'll do this time is we'll put the backing fabric on top of the front of the placemat, right sides together with the batting on the back, so all the way around the outside edge, and then turn it through. Normally, when people bag out, they'll leave a gap to turn through. But I think you can always see where an opening's been closed on an edge. And I don't think it's the neatest finish. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to have a seam running down the middle of the backing with an opening somewhere in the middle to turn the whole thing through. Let me show you what I mean. So I've got my piece of backing fabric here, and this is bigger, probably about an inch and a half bigger at the moment on all sides than my placemat. What I'm going to do is fold it in half down the lengthways. Now this is only very roughly cut out, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to trim the edge off at the end. And I'm just going to give it a little press in half, just to create a nice sort of crease down the middle. I'll just fold it up, and I'm just going to trim that crease off. So it's folded in half at the moment. So what I've done now is I've split my backing into two halves. And what I'll do next is I'm going to sew them back together again, but I'm going to leave a gap in the middle. I'm going to see if I can remember to leave a gap. I usually have to put pins in the centre to remind me. But I think with you here today, I can probably remember. So I'll leave a gap, about 4 inches, and then I'll sew to the end. Okay, good. So my backing's back together again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the seam allowance open. But what I'm going to try and do is when I'm pressing that seam, even that bit down the middle that's a gap, I'm going to press those seam allowances open as well, so that when I come to hand sew the opening closed, the edges are already neatened. Okay, so 2 little jobs done now. I've got my backing fabric pieced back together again, and I've pressed the seam open, and I've even pressed the seam open there in the middle where there's that little gap. Okay, so that's ready for putting together. The other thing that I've done is I've just attached my my top placemat to some quilt batting. The quilt batting's an inch or so bigger on all sides, and I've just used 505 spray. Now that's the easiest way to get these layers together. You could hand baste them, or you could pin them even. And if you're not sure how to do that, we've done a little video on how to layer a quilt sandwich, so have a look for that. Okay, so once you've got your quilt top or your placemat top spray basted or hand basted to your batting, you can trim all that extra batting off around the edge. I mean, it's not essential to have that extra around the edge on this project, but I think it just makes placing the 2 pieces together a lot easier if you've got a little bit that you can trim off. So that's done. And I've got my backing fabric. Now this is bigger on all sides. And what I'm going to do then is lay this down on the table, pretty side facing up. And then I'm going to lay my placemat on top of that, pretty side down. And if I just hold it up for a second and show you, you can see there's a little bit of extra fabric all the way around. So my next job is to pin all the way around the outside, and then I'm going to sew all the way around the outside as well. And I'm going to use the edge of the batting as my guide. So I'm just sewing all the way around the outside edge now, and 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you could use a walking foot for this, but if you pin it really well, you should be fine. And all the time that I'm sewing, I'm lining up the foot of my sewing machine with the edge of my batting, which remember is trimmed really accurately. Just pivot at the corners. So because we're sewing it around the edge, it's almost like a cushion cover. I'm going to turn it through that gap that we left in the backing fabric, and then we'll sew that up. And it means that we don't have to add a binding. It just makes the job a lot quicker, because binding can take a while. even if you do it by machine. I suppose really while I'm making these placemats, should tell you I'm thinking about the meal that I'm going to cook to go on them. Some romantic dinner, maybe stroganoff. I love stroganoff. With noodles, creme à la coeur for pudding. I'll probably just end up making a crumble. Okay, that's done. That didn't take any time at all. Pins can come out now. Now, the reason why I wasn't having to take the pins out as I sewed was because I'd positioned them far enough in that they weren't going to get in the way of the foot, which again, just makes that job a little bit quicker. Last thing before I turn it through, I just need to trim the extra fabric off the edges, so I'll do that next. And all I need to do is to turn the whole thing through that gap in the middle. So it's like any turning job. You're just pushing everything through that gap, pulling it through to the right side. And you can do small quilts like this as well. Baby quilts are often bagged out. I'm using my chopstick now just to push the corner out, but I'm not going to go too mad at the corners. What I don't want to do is to stretch the fabric at the corners, which you can do if you're a little bit overzealous with the old chopstick. And then this is one time when I am going to use a hand sewing needle and thread to sew that opening up in the back. In a bag, if I leave a gap, I'll tend to sew that up by machine because that's really not ever going to be seen. But on this placemat, you do want the back to be attractive and to look good. So there we go. That's all turned through to the right side. At the moment, it looks a bit like a sort of pillowcase. And hey, I suppose stuffed and with the back closed, that would make a really nice pillow or cushion, wouldn't it? So there you go. There's pattern number 4, or are we at number 5 now? Goodness me, there's a lot in today's video. So I'm going to give this a really nice press. So I suppose this is where it differs a little bit from making a traditional quilt sandwich, because we would quilt it before we did the edges. But when it's bagged out, we do the edges, we turn it all through, and then we do any quilting that we want to do. So to finish off my placemats, once I've got them all turned through, I've just added a little bit of quilting. Just helps hold all the layers together. And all I've done is slightly longer stitch length, just like I would for top stitching. And I've just gone either side of the cross all the way. And then I've gone around the inside of the border and then just near to the edge as well. And then to go with it, I've made a really quick and easy napkin. Again, using one of the fat quarters from the bundle. And what I did was I cut, this is about a 17-inch, 18-inch square, as big as you can cut basically from a fat quarter. And then I've just turned a double hem, about 3/8 of an inch double hem all the way around, and then just top stitched all the way around that edge. And that just gives me a really simple napkin that can then go alongside my placemat. And I'm ready for a romantic evening in. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial from Stuart Hillard Makes, and you'll add a comment and like. Please make sure you send some pictures of your makes, and I hope you enjoy your sewing and making. Until next time, goodbye from me.